Ja, hej hej. Hej hej. Jag tänkte bara börja med att säga att jag är demokrat och ni får visst hålla föreläsningar när ni ställer frågor. Bara de är bra. Har ni inget att säga däremot så kommer jag med att sluta. Okay, I will switch to English now.
Thank you.
So you understand what we're saying. A debate is raging worldwide about the future of the capitalist system. So within the left, there are those who claim that the system is about to end, such as yourself and the German Wolfgang Streeck, who just released his book, How Will Capitalism End? On the other side, we have those like David Harvey, who claim that capitalism's ability to mutate will make it survive even in the future. So I want to welcome you, Paul Mason, to Sweden.
Thank you.
Have you been here before?
Yes, I have, but this time let's give Donald Trump something really to worry about. I think he should worry about what happens last night in Sweden tomorrow.
Oh, because you are here now?
Well, because
so
we rise up and we get angry.
We get angry. Okay, you wrote in your previous book why it's kicking off everywhere about all the revolutions and uprisings that were happening in 2011. How do you look at the world now?
I think those revolutions were real. They have been suppressed and defeated. We asked ourselves at the time, is this going to be like 1905 in Russia? I think it's turned out like that. I've been working only this week with people who were involved in the Arab Spring, and across the table said the words, the defeat of the Egyptian revolution. And they literally got up and said, you can't say this. So there is a school of thought on the left that thinks it's all over, and I don't. But I thought at the time, especially, look, it's obvious what the problems were with, say, the Egyptian secular left, but with the Swedish secular left, with the British left, with the Occupy movement, it was not so obvious, but I thought unless they come up with some overall strategic goal and a holistic project to replace neoliberalism with, they won't win. Because they won't inspire really masses of people with the idea that there is a different future. And so the failures of the 2011 movements are what led me to write this book and try to say, okay, well, somebody's got to write what's the plan?
And that is you, or?
Well, I tried. In this sense, Streeck's book, we don't want to talk about Streeck's book too much because I don't agree with it massively, but what it is, it's an analysis of a collapse. My book is an analysis of a collapse and the technological grounding of a transition project beyond the collapse. And I think that is what those of us who, I was born in 1960, I grew up in a very social democratic town, I grew up inside the traditional left, I was trained as a traditional Marxist. Those of us who lived through that and broke from it can at least pass to the next generation and future generations the idea that there is an alternative. Because that's what was missing for 20 years in the high point of neoliberalism.
So in this book, you basically argue that neoliberalism has exhausted itself and that we saw that most markedly in the crisis of 2008. Now, what is your definition of neoliberalism? What is that?
Well, the interesting thing is, when the far-right Adam Smith Institute heard my answer to this, they kept saying, but that's not a definition. And those of you who are familiar with the left's philosophical argument with the right should be aware that we don't do definitions, because we don't do staticness. My definition of neoliberalism is to describe it from beginning to middle to end. And in that sense, I first of all would say, as a category, neoliberalism is an objective system. I'm interested in the psychology, I'm interested in the ideology of neoliberalism, and there are whole departments in universities that study this stuff, but that to me is not what I'm studying. I'm studying the whole global system as it emerged from 1989 through to 2008. And it is therefore, yes, it's America, yes, it's Britain, but also China, Germany, Japan are part of the neoliberal system because their savings and their mercantilist policies make the policies of America and Britain possible. So it's a whole system that worked like it worked like a machine, and what the machine did is it expanded credit, and it replaced wages with loans. You know, in Britain, and I mean, I'm not so sure here how it works, but in Britain and America, you see flatlining wages for nearly 20 years, and you see credit boom to 300% of GDP and above. My argument simply is what that does is it creates a boom and bust cycle. The boom and bust cycle is not a cycle. It's a destructive mechanism. It's destroying welfare states. It's destroying pensioners. It's destroying the future of the poor and the young. And it doesn't work anymore. You can't borrow your way out of it, and wages are still static. And so the system is, I mean, it's on life support, and it's been on life support for 8 years now, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work any more than the Keynesian model, which I grew up in. That collapsed, and we could really see it had collapsed. Neoliberalism has effectively fallen into a state of stagnation.
So basically your definition, although you say that you don't have one, is that neoliberalism is about financialization. It's about,
well, it's interesting this. It's about financialization, number one. It's about, the key to the whole project is the suppression of organised labour's bargaining power. Even now, you know, I'm a member of the British Labour Party on its left. Even now, every day I wake up, the entire media, from the Daily Mail, the far-right newspaper, through even to the BBC, they have one project: to smash and destroy and to denigrate the idea that working people can have an alternative society that they fight for. And when Labour represents it, I mean, we're in a very, very strange position that for once we have a leader and a policy that it looks left social democratic. It's really obvious that the inner impulse of the whole neoliberal system is to suppress this. So having suppressed our ability to fight for wages, for better conditions, for a good society, the kind of quite socially peaceful society I grew up in a working class town, they suppressed that. My other argument is, without workers' resistance, you don't get innovation. In a country like Britain and in the extreme neoliberal countries like Canada, America, what you get is the opposite of innovation. So you get, it's a fascinating fact. We used to have 4,000 machine car washes in Britain. We now have 1,000 machine car washes and 20,000 hand car washes staffed by very poor people. So that's not progress. I think that's the Roman Empire collapsing to me. And I think we need an alternative. We need to say to people, it doesn't work, let's move on from the system, let's find something different.
But when you're saying it doesn't work, do you mean it like in wishful terms, or are you seeing concrete evidence that it doesn't work? Because apparently we saw it crash in 2008. But after that, it seems back to business as usual. I mean, credit and debt is going up. It's not going down. There's been very few changes to bank regulations, for example. If you look at Basel III, it's not really changing how banks are operating. So it seems like it's still going on. How do you see that it's ending?
So if you print $12 trillion and flood the markets with it and reduce interest rates to zero, as all the major economies have done together, coordinatedly, you can survive. And it can feel quite good. You know, guys, women wake up one morning, decide to be an entrepreneur. Labor is so cheap. You set up some company with no innovative pizzazz to it. You simply exploit people. You borrow money for free. You know, the people building these, I bet it's the same here in Stockholm, people building these huge new blocks of offices and shops. The rent is virtually free. They're just there to bring, to make it look good. So some guy from Qatar arrives and says, oh, the shops are all let. Let's buy this building. It's extend and pretend is what it's called. And I think we've extended and pretended for 8 years. And it's not just me. It's not the crazy leftists who are saying this, but people at the heart of bourgeois economics. Larry Summers is the best example, saying, look, maybe it never gets better. Maybe the dynamism has gone. Now, in my book, I tried to find a technological explanation for that, rather than, as Summers does, a simple malfunction of the credit system explanation.
Yeah, so that kind of brings us to the heart of your argument, because you claim, I mean, in your book you're using some fragments that Marx wrote and that were discovered long after his death on machines, where he says that if there was a machine that didn't cost anything to make, that could last forever and that would never break, this machine would not create surplus value. So you claim that this machine has now been invented and will bring down capitalism. What is this machine?
Well, it's a great question. Just to correct it slightly, what I think Marx says is that those of you who are familiar with, you don't have to be familiar with Marxist economics because it works for standard textbook economics as well. If the cost of production is zero, the price is going to end up zero in a market economy. Marx simply had a more theoretical way of putting that, and a machine that lasts forever and costs nothing is software. Of course, it becomes outmoded. It costs stuff to maintain, but it wasn't me who discovered the fragment on machines. It was famously Roman Rostolski, the Polish Marxist, and then Antonio Negri, famously in the 70s, before he became what he's famous for now, the Negriite autonomist. At the beginning of that process, Negri wrote an amazing book called Marx Beyond Marx that more or less says what I've just said. And what's amazing is that in the 40 years since then, capitalism did come up with exactly this. Marx speaks about a general intellect. Marx speaks about the socialization of knowledge. Marx speaks, having observed it in the cotton industry, about the general tendency of capitalism to push people away from production into observing machines. And he says something very, very important for us. When we get to that position, when all the improvements that happen every day in business are effectively happening for free because we are socially sharing the knowledge, that's going to run into the private property relationships on which capitalism has been based. Now, this is a very different story to the story in Capital, to the story of 20th century Marxism. And I don't claim it explains everything, but I think it does arm us for the possibility that socially produced knowledge and collaborative production are a much bigger challenge to capitalist relations of production than we thought they might be.
But I wonder how you can claim that software costs nothing to make. I mean, it's made by people. You have 21 million people in the whole world that just work as software developers. I mean, writing code, making updates, and just maintenance is done by people. This is a giant industry, and just, I mean, I was reading today about just the apps that are surpassing now games as the main thing. And just apps are generating $100 billion a year, which is constantly requiring more and more people. So we're seeing, far from what you're saying, that this is something that's generating itself. You need people to make it. You need people to maintain it, to update it, and to work on it all the time. Yeah.
So the reproduction cost and the production cost, in this sense, are different. There's always a production cost, but you know. And what you're describing there is a production cost. I would argue a lot of those dollars are there because of an artificial monopoly that the capitalist system has produced over the past 25 to 30 years. It's produced monopoly after monopoly, basically as the solution to the same problem, that information wants to be free, that its reproduction costs are very low, and actually that some of you will probably work in software, but many of you will work in businesses. And if you go tomorrow and say to your tech people, how much of the stuff we use is actually produced for free by people in our industry, the standards, the tools, the little workarounds, they'll tell you a lot. And I think that you can go on producing software through monopolization. Whenever a local city council tries to use free software, in comes Company X, I will say. I don't know what the libel laws are in Sweden. Company X comes in and says, no, we'll pay you not to use it. This happened again and again and again. You can do all of that, but it's not the same as an organic capitalism. Capitalism is supposed to reproduce itself without lawyers. It has a legal system, but the basic mechanisms of price formation should happen naturally and normally within the production process, because it costs stuff to produce, it costs stuff to reproduce. Once the main risk of a major software money spinner like Katalys, which is what they used to design aircraft. If you read the business report, what's it called, the annual report of the company that produces Katalys, the main risk is that somebody works out how to copy and paste it. That's the #1 risk, because it could be, it could easily collapse in price. So look, the one part of the argument actually that nobody in the mainstream ever comes back to, because it's not just me arguing it. A lot of people accept what the so-called zero marginal cost thesis, that information is different. It can reproduce itself for free, and soon, I'm afraid, those 21, however many people, million developers, I think they are as doomed as cottage weavers were over the 100 and 150 years. Most software development will be done by software.
Well, but somebody still has to make that software, and somebody has to update it
True.
and make sure that it works and so on. So aren't you guilty of the thing that people on the other side always do, namely hide the work and make a fetish out of the product? Because what we as Marxists do is to show the work behind something, to show that a product doesn't just exist by itself. Somebody made it, and it's a worker that's behind it who deserves to get the fruit of his or her labor. But what you're doing is talking about this product as if it was making itself, when on the other hand, we're seeing an industry that's growing and that's employing more and more people, and when actually it's human labor that's behind all this.
I'm not denying that the software industry employs human labor, capital, and the surplus value, and the rest of it. But the way I put it back to you is this. Wikipedia. 27,000 people regularly write for Wikipedia. They do it for free. They do it for kicks. They do it for reward of a different nature. If I do it, it's because I know that by doing that, I make it's a better product. And I keep Microsoft from ever being able to reinvade the encyclopedia market. Remember Encarta? So the nemesis for what they did to Linux was done by Wikipedia to Encarta. So when I do that for free. 19,000 authors in the Encyclopedia Britannica at the point at which it more or less finished development, 90% of whom were dead. 27,000 living authors make Wikipedia for free. It doesn't show up anywhere on a company profit and loss account, except its own, which is run on donations. And it doesn't show up in GDP. What is it? I think that's an interesting question for a mainstream economic thinker or for a Marxist. What is it? To use the... I'm not saying you're saying this, but I have heard some Marxists, orthodox Marxists, basically call for Wikipedia people to be paid wages. No, the wages are the collaborative goodwill that we generate in this new information-based sector of the economy that we can produce and consume for free. I'm incredibly excited by that, because I know how hard it would be if we wanted to escape scarcity only through state planning plus the market.
I mean, I agree with you. I think Wikipedia is a great thing, and I think it's great that people are contributing to it without necessarily wanting something out of it. But I mean, isn't that just one example? I mean, hasn't there always been unpaid labor? I mean, what is reproductive labor that women have always done? If we wanted to point at something that people do for free without wanting money, we could just point at that. That's been existing all along, and nobody's been saying, oh, capitalism is going to crash because I hold my little baby. Oh, I'm not asking for money.
Fact,
you know, I mean, you're pointing at
it.
one thing, which is Wikipedia, but if you look at the whole IT development, that's kind of the exception, no?
I don't think it is. It's not IT. I mean, Wikipedia isn't an IT product. It's a collaboratively produced information product. And half of all web servers run on free software. Android has what, 70% market share, is it now? 70% of you have a free software on your mobile phones. Of course, you're paying for apps, but why? It's in capitalism's interest actually to develop these freely, collaboratively produced things, because on top of that, what they're trying to do is create monopoly profit from the apps or from the monopolized music service. But there again, see, my argument is that that capitalism has ceased to exist in its normal form. It's just that the price formation mechanism becomes much more difficult under a situation of exponentially collapsing costs of production. It's not me who says this, it's Deloitte. Actually, Deloitte, the consultancy group, go much further than me. Deloitte says that the exponential, this is analog PowerPoint, okay, analog PowerPoint. This curve is what most price curves look like in IT. All right, this is what it cost to produce, to sequence a genome of DNA 15 years ago, $100,000. It's $1,000 now. Deloitte says that never stops. I don't know whether I agree with it, but you know, whether one of the big four consultancies says, look, unlike steel, unlike electricity, you don't reach a plateau and then, you know, steelworks today looks roughly what it looks like 100 years ago. No, you never stop. In that situation, you have to begin to imagine a social justice project based on abundance. And at the center of what I'm arguing, whether you agree with my description of the emergence of little pools of alternative, such as Wikipedia is, you have to ask yourself, what do we do if abundance suddenly rushes at us? And of course, to answer your question about childcare and unpaid domestic labor, these are remnants of, you know, first of all, they're the remnants of pre-capitalism, but in capitalism systematized them and used, you know, the unpaid domestic labor of women and at one point of children as well to valorize itself. The interesting thing is now they are rushing towards solutions which pull as many people as possible into the commercial world. You know, there are even pro-capitalist arguments for paying domestic labor now because they need everything to be commercialized, because just like they privatize the water in Bolivia, they need to get into every part of human life and infest it with the commercial motive, because so little profitability and dynamism is occurring in the traditional areas, I would argue.
Because you write in your book that now, I mean, what is different about information? And you say that because you can copy and paste something instead of actually having to hold the actual thing. That's the difference. So wouldn't the epitome of that be money nowadays? Because nowadays you don't have to print and hold the money as such. But money is made by banks when they press a button. So you can copy and paste money. So wouldn't money then be the end of capitalism, well, in your argument?
That's not how I argue it. What I'm trying to say, look, you mentioned David Harvey earlier on, and he's not the only one who says that because capitalism has always evolved, it must therefore always evolve. I think, in fact, you know, I'm not sure how clearly he says that, but I've heard that argument so clearly from the conservative right in Britain. Again and again, I'll be sitting next to them on a chat show, and they say, well, it's always been fine before. And, you know, it's true. You know, Rosa Luxemburg famously wrote that all markets would soon be exhausted and then capitalism would collapse. And in the time it took her to write the book, the number of movie theaters in Berlin grew from 1 to 168. You know, new markets appear inside capitalism. The market is trying to pervade our personal lives. We now do friendship work for each other in order to give profits to Facebook. But my argument is there is a limit to this, and that capitalism's adaptation mechanisms have always relied on its ability to create expensive products, expensive work, new skills, and higher wages. This is the synthesis that occurred in the Belle Epoque. It's the synthesis that occurred after 1945. My argument is that information makes that more difficult to do. Not impossible in small pools, but it's more difficult to do at a societal level. And how we feel it is the sudden disappearance of work. I mean, everybody's talking about, will robots take our jobs? Don't worry about the robots. Worry about the artificial intelligence. It will destroy half of all jobs, I think, in the next 30 years. And then it creates a problem for the traditional left and the traditional right. What are you going to do about it? We know what the traditional right wants to do about it. Bring jobs back to America. You know, the kind of stop producing cars in Mexico. Why do you think they're produced in Mexico? Because wages are low. Bring them back to America. It's going to be a robot doing it. So we on the left have to decide. We've had this utopia based on work, and a beautiful utopia it was. I grew up in it. I'm formed by it. I grieve that it's not there anymore, but I can't bring it back.
Yeah, but that's not what I said. I meant that your argument is that if you can copy and paste something indefinitely, then that in itself is anti-capitalist because you can't hold it. That's where you're arguing about information wants to be free. But then that would relate to money as well nowadays. But what we're seeing is the opposite, that information and money, instead of being something that you print and hold, it being something that you can copy and paste all over, we're seeing the opposite tendency. We're seeing it accumulating and concentrating in the hands of the very few who own the means to copy and paste, which we cannot do.
Well, they certainly do own the means of copying and pasting money, but I do think the outcome of that actually does prove my point, because the price of money is now below zero. That's what quantitative easing has done.
For them, but not for us.
Yeah, for us. Well, actually, even in Britain, you know, you'd be surprised how easily you can get money at zero interest rate, even in Britain, as a poor person. In other words, I think we're in yet another.
If you try to save, but not if you try to borrow, though.
But so yeah, absolutely. So the issue for us is, okay, we have. It almost illustrates it, doesn't it? The capitalism is not reproducing itself normally. It's not gone through a boom bust after which a load of companies get wiped out, banks get wiped out, new innovative industries come forward. It's in a moment of stasis, and it's the money printing and the money printing power of states and central banks that has kept it alive, I think, prevented it from having any kind of wipeout or clear out. And I think implicitly that's because they know that after the wipeout or clear-out does not come a new post-1945 boom. There is no basis, and this is the root of my argument, there is no technological future for the market. There's a technological future for humanity, absolutely. These things are enriching us incredibly, but they're collapsing in price. And if you have an entire world economy based on the promise to pay back, because that's what a credit-based economy is. You know, we lend 300% of GDP. We believe that in several years' time, GDP will be so big that that 300%, you know, rise will be wiped out. Just the same as in a period of high inflation. It doesn't matter, you know, if you paid a lot of money for your house, you know, because inflation wipes it out. The opposite's going to happen. There's no new value being created by information technology, I argue, only by the monopolization strategies of the big corporations, and these they first have to eat each other, and then they'll eat themselves. And at the end, I mean, what's the practical outcome of what I argue is that the market cap of Google, Facebook, Amazon, and the rest of them is fiction, and they know. I think some of them actually know it. I mean, some of them they look into the heart of darkness every day and think, where the heck is the value going to come from that justifies our share price?
But even if your case were true, say even if software didn't need any worker at all, it was maintaining itself, it was producing itself, and so on, and it was lasting forever. I mean, you still need a device to use all these apps and so on. And what we're seeing now is the opposite of a kind of immaterial world. What we're seeing is more products are being produced than ever. The industrial working class has never been as big as now. I mean, in China, it's like 890 million people, the industrial working class. And we're seeing just the number of phones, I read, the number of smartphones, the number of mobile phones, sorry, exceeds the number of people in the world. And they're changing it like once a year or once every second year. Plus they have an iPad, plus they have a TV, and they have all these sorts of things they didn't used to have like 20 years ago. So we're seeing like more and more things are being produced. I mean, the hardware is being produced. It's being transported somewhere. And it's being repaired. And it's already creating all these environmental disasters in Africa, for example, and in Latin America. So how does that relate to your theory that all of a sudden there's no production cost?
No. Well, I can tell you it relates both to the theory and to the solution. Let's use a concrete example of a modern airliner. It's the production cost of the modern airliner is very, very much lower than an old style one because of the information technology that goes into the design of it. Or, I mean, the example given to me by one engineer was that he'd worked on the tail fin of the old British Tornado fighter bomber, this big thing with a big tail fin. And he said they tested, with their slide rules, 12 variations of the stress loads on the metal. And when they did the replacement, the Eurofighter, they tested it 186 million times. So that's in the space of a lifetime. What does that do? It means that when they make it, there are no defects. It means that you get almost defect-free production, which lowers the cost of both the production and shortens the innovation cycle. These are all good things. These are good things for capitalists. They should be good things, apart from the fact that we're making fighter bombers. They should be good things for us if we're making good things. It's also true that I think the information revolution allows us, or should allow us, to circumvent this wasteful use of natural resources. You know, it's not ultra-leftists who are now arguing and concentrating on the circularity, designing in the ability to recycle 100% of the stuff. But what capitalism is doing is it's operating almost completely as an intermonopoly system. Now, we are creating stuff we don't need. We are creating mega profits that are effectively rent extracted from the rest of the economy rather than a reward for innovation. And we're still stagnating, is my argument. Now, in that situation, I don't think we can go on. And I think a social justice project, a transformation project, a project that eventually frees the cobalt mining kid from Central Africa and frees the Chinese factory worker. See, if we go to them and say, we have this old thing called socialism, where the state plans everything and allocates all the goods, and you have to have a really simple economy for this to happen with very little variation and very little innovation, they'll say, well, it didn't work, one. B, this does. So we have to have a different alternative. And to come back to your original question, what I'm trying to do is to say, on the basis of the technological change we're living through, which, you know, is the greatest increase in human capacity over nature ever experienced in one generation, surely it's that we should base our project of social justice and equality on, rather than the old model of mid-20th century socialism.
I mean, new always sounds better than old to me.
Well, especially if old killed 20 million people in a famine. I buy that. Yeah.
But okay, let's go to that, because that's interesting, because in the last part of your book you are kind of looking to the future, and you are sketching some of the solutions that, you know, we might have, because after all, if capitalism is going to end, what is going to replace it? And one thing that you say there is that you don't believe that the working class is the agent of change. You write that you think it's impossible to imagine the working class overthrowing capitalism, and instead you believe in the educated, networking human being.
Yeah. So I think when André Gortz wrote his book in the 1980s, you know, Goodbye to the Working Class, I scorned it, and I think it was the wrong thing to write at the time, when we were linking arms on the miners' strike picket lines in Britain. To read a book saying farewell to the working class was ridiculous. But Gortz had some very interesting things to say in this book, and I think they were ultimately right. And that was that technological progress would create the possibility of a route towards abundance that didn't have to go through a long period of scarcity, first of all, that it would break up the necessity of work, that it would indeed, Gortz was one of the first people to say this, you know, the struggles will be of women who are, who are not at work. There will be women's struggles at work. There will also be women defined through their relationship to the home. There will be struggles for wages for housework, Gort said, and there were. Now, I think for me, the working class as I grew up around it, as it existed in the 1970s and 80s, defied all the new left theorists who said it would never struggle. My God, they struggled. And they struggled actually in a way probably more radical. If you look at the Italian strikes of 1969, if you look at what happened in Britain in the 70s, here too, the struggles were immense. But when they were confronted with the problem of, well, what are you going to do? I know, because I count them on my friends and my networks, probably hundreds of working class manual workers who fought through that. They had no strategy to overthrow capitalism. They just didn't. And for me, now, it's an abstract question. I don't see the working class has been replaced. I use the exact same word that Marx uses in Capital, the German word Aufhebung. In English, it's translated as sublated, improved and destroyed at the same time. And I think the emergence of a networked, intelligent, I mean, everybody works, everybody gets a wage. If you leave aside the 1% bourgeois ultra elite, it's the emergence of a conscious subject that I'm very excited about. In the book I write about my grandma, and she was a miner's wife and really hard as nails and had an immense revolutionary spirit, but she had no theory. She almost didn't think logically. She had a series of experiences and emotions which led her to do sometimes extreme things in the class struggle. But I look at the people I work with, in journalism, alongside me, in struggles that are taking place in our community. They have theory, they have intelligence, they have agency, and I celebrate this. At its worst, 20th century Marxism, not Marx, I'm a massive fan of Marx, but Leninism, above all, you'll know the certain different nuances of Leninism, but at its worst, it said the proletariat takes power despite its ignorance. I saw that ignorance actually lead it not to take power. So I celebrate the opposite of ignorance. I celebrate the fact that we've now got, like the Occupy movement, like in Tahrir Square in Egypt, we've got a conscious subject in history with all that brings, because they're able to reason. And we, as leftists, cannot stand back from them and almost watch them as automata move through history, but we have to listen to when they reason with us and have arguments with them, and sometimes lose the arguments with them, as we did, you know it because you've written about Greece. In Greece, we had arguments that we didn't win.
So do you see like the coming battles as being more about reason, as arguments against arguments?
No,
arguments against fake news, or?
Well, look, let's talk about fake news in a minute. But I see the battles that we are in like this. The first chapter of this book is really unpopular. The last bits, the neoliberal kind of trendy people quite like it because it's talking about the future. But the beginning says, if we don't stop neoliberalism now, globalization will collapse. It will break up and it will be like the 30s. Now, I wrote that in 2014. It was published in 2015. And I'm afraid by now, I'm being proved righter than I want to be proved right. I think Trump is going to break up globalization. And I think that our struggles are all basically going to revolve around that. And so it is the struggle for a society based on reason, on restraint, on multiculturalism, on multi-ethnicity, on the rule of law. That's where we are. And into that, I'm really glad that we go into that struggle with the most educated generation there's ever been. A generation we thought were trapped behind, between the two earbuds, the white wire people, I call them in the book. We thought they were obsessive individualists. It turns out they're really amazing fighters, but they fight in a different way. And you can only learn the lessons of your experience in life. I saw that other way fail, and I can't bring it back, and so I have to try and do what we can with the people who have, quite courageously resisted given that they had 20 years being told there was no resistance possible, almost from nowhere in 2011, they do start resisting. And I think we can only celebrate that.
I mean, it's true that people are more educated now, but when it comes to being the agent of change or the subject of change, what Marxists mean when they say that the working class is the agent of change, it's not because they want it to be that way, it's because they see that it has a certain material power that, for example, an unemployed person doesn't have. If you don't have a job, nobody will care what you do because you're not being missed. If you just sit down and strike, nothing will happen. But if you have a job, if you, at any given point in history, in geography, anywhere, at any time, decide all of a sudden to stop working and to say no, and to do that collectively, you will cause society to stop, and you will also break down capitalism because they will be unable to extract surplus value. So that's the material power that the worker has. Now, the educated subject you're talking about, that's fighting outside the working place, does it have equivalent material power, and where is that? I
think it does, but it's not equivalent, but it is distributed. So there's a great passage in this book, The Coming Insurrection, which was written just before the 2008 crash by a group of French anarchists. And it says, the proletariat had the workplace in which to find each other. We have the whole of society. You see, and I think they're making a very good point. They're not saying boo to the proletariat. They're saying hooray for that, but now we have even more. Because if you look at how capital is valorized, that is, how does capital make its money? You can, what's the rate of profit of an average car manufacturer? Let's call its headline profit 10, 15%. They're lucky if it's that, 10, 15%. Let's assume, in Marxist terms, that's the rate of extraction of surplus value, 15%. That's not bad for modern capitalism. A woman with no job in Britain who goes to buy a fridge from one of these predatory shops that sell fridges on endless credit, okay? She pays 1,000% interest on the money she uses to buy that. It's 1,000% rate of profit. So the finance system and the consumption system is extracting value through our consumption, and that's the other part of it. I believe this. We are creating these brands. We create, the fact that if my foot had a big swoosh on it, was wearing a Nike swoosh, I'm helping to create that. Now, what does it mean? Yes, of course, we fight in the workplace. And what's brilliant is that these so-called individualist, precariat young workers, all working on 3 jobs, there have been a ton of strikes by them in London in the last year. Deliveroo, Uber, the cinema workers are now on strike, all mainly young, all mainly educated. That's great, but what else can we do? We can refuse the brand. This is the great thing behind Naomi Klein's understanding of brands. You can destroy a brand, and we can refuse the credit system. But what do we need? We need credit unions. We need low-level, collaborative, small-scale, sometimes amateurish ways of organizing ourselves. So what? We can begin to create a counterpower to capitalism within capitalism. And, of course, that was always part of the labor movement's tradition. It was even at its best part of the Marxist tradition, but in its most at its worst, Marxism didn't see the power of the low, from below refusal and creation, and it saw only this strategic clash between worker and boss in the factory, leading to the Soviets. Blah blah blah. I am functionally more of an anarcho-syndicalist than I am a Marxist when it comes to the dynamics of the modern struggle. But neither of those terms really sums up how I think we're going to have to go forward. But I do think it means every little step we make that refuses how capital dominates us means that, in the words of the Irish anarchist John Holloway, it's a beautiful phrase, and I never understood it until I saw it happen. We are the crisis of capitalism. It's not the economics. We can be its crisis.
So it seems that you mean that the material power that the educated person has is the consumer's power.
Consumer, the brand creator, the borrower, and the worker. We have, in Britain, I mean, Britain's not been the best place for struggle, but during 2011, when the Occupy movement was going on, the thing that really made the difference was occupying the branches of banks that don't pay their taxes, coffee shops like Starbucks that weren't paying enough tax, and actually going in small scale and saying, unless you start paying tax, we're going to stay here. No, they started to pay tax, and the government started to clamp down on them. But the really interesting thing was, I know the small group of people who started this campaign called UK Uncut. They started with 1 action, then it went to 5 actions, then it went to 10 actions. On the day of the 3rd Saturday, it went to 70 actions, 50 of which they hadn't planned. That's another thing. We have the ability to use information technology to just copy each other. So 50 groups just got together without anybody telling them to and did the same thing. I think we can. I'm not saying, look, it leaves behind the 20th century tradition of hierarchical organization. You need a plan, you need a strategy, you need sometimes basic hierarchies. But I celebrate the replacement of the ultra-hierarchical means of struggle with the horizontal and the networked ones. Yeah, I do.
And that brings us a little bit back to all the uprisings that you were talking about in your previous book and what happened to them, because you know, when I was in Greece and I saw the uprisings in the squares, for example, I mean, that's like the epitome of what you mean by the networking individual and so on. And, you know, but essentially, doesn't it come down to the same thing? Because in my analysis, why this failed was they didn't have material power, because there was nothing that they could use to pressure the government or the troika to cede to their demands, because they were just people standing there. And I mean, who cared if they were standing there? In the end, the police got bored and you know, just kicked them out, and that was it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but when there have been general strikes, and there have been so many, I mean, that's a different thing, because the whole country stops. There's no transport, there's no train, nobody's unloading the bags at the airport, all the tourists get pissed off, the industry loses a lot of money. I mean, the impact of that is something completely different. So, and I'm sure those people are networking as well, but they're doing it in the form of the working class.
Well, look, I think if we talk concretely about Greece, and Greece still is the laboratory of what is the way this period we're all living through ends up, will probably be trialed out in Greece first. So when you see what finally happens in Greece, I think you need to take cognizance of it. But let's look at the stages. Yes, the 2011 movement of the squares had weaknesses, but it also had strengths that the Greek left had never had before. Greek left is a Communist Party, 7–8%. You know, traditionally, what's its number one objective? To march in the opposite direction to all other parties on May Day. Okay, there are other countries where this happens, but fine. Okay, these people drew in masses, really masses, and it wasn't just on one square, it was every square, small squares, and it was people coming to the fore who'd never done stuff before. Then what did they do? They didn't just sit on the square. They went to road tolls and they lifted up the barrier and said, go through. And when the guy on the toll rings the boss, well, they take his phone off him. Or they go into magistrates' courts, small courts, where they are taking houses that have been seized by the state and selling them, and they just occupy the court until they stop. So the direct action was, I would argue, challenging capital in a much more granular way than the traditional strike plus demonstration did. Okay, what did a lot of those anarchist and autonomist people then do? They joined Syriza, or they supported Syriza. Okay, Syriza takes on the ECB and the IMF. It doesn't know what to do at the crucial moment. But I was there in those crucial weeks for the whole time. And we were all, Syriza's activists had this WhatsApp group. You know WhatsApp? The WhatsApp group. So everybody's contributing to it. 60 or 70, what in the Marxist movement we call cadres. You know, educated and trained people. They're contributing. Effectively, what they're discussing is when the pharmacies close, when the banks are closed already, pharmacies, bakeries, Nestle factory for baby milk. Can we reopen them, take them over, put a red flag outside, get 3 beefy-looking guys to stand at the door and play Bandiera Rossa and give out the medicine? That's what they were discussing. And you know what the answer was? No. No. We're not big enough. Also, a lot of the young people, this is the weakness of the networked youth, a lot of the young people saw that right-wing movement, that mass right-wing movement of July 2015, anti-Syriza, and said, these are people who killed my granddad. These are people who tortured my granddad. You know, I didn't realize this was going to be as bad as this. And they backed off. We discussed it, the Athenian commune. Are we going to have, like the Paris commune, the Athenian commune? And most of the left in Greece said, no, we're not going to do it. Now, did that solve anything? No, because Greece is going to go bust. You believe me, there's going to be Grexit or a debt write-off. That's what the Europeans want. The masses, they might be disappointed, but they're still angry. I think we don't know what we know what the weaknesses of networked action are. We know what the weaknesses of hierarchical laborism, labor movementism are. We need a synthesis of it, and we need to make it work. That's what our predecessors in the Spanish Civil War did. They looked for a synthesis. Do you know what I mean? And I think all we can do, we're living through, it's real life, it's real skin here. We're not living through a film, a movie. We are in it. We're in the movie. So we just got to find the best possible ending we can find.
So how does it end?
I think it could end in absolutely disaster. I think.
Oh no! This is a good movie.
Well, I wish it was.
You're the utopian
but,
here. Now you have to describe postcapitalism. Yeah. What does it look like?
No, go on.
No. You're the author of the book. Now tell me.
No, look. I think when I wrote the book, remember 2008 crisis, 2011 Euro crisis, same answer. Print money, print money, print money. That's the answer. Keep the consumer economy going. More bread and circuses. Until December, the main struggle was between what I would describe anti-neoliberal leftism and the masses who support that, and the neoliberal elite. I see Trump as a break from neoliberalism. There are other theories, other people see it just as an extension. I see it as a break, because what's crucial about Trump is going to be the overriding the rule of law. I think it's going to destroy the American democratic settlement. And in that situation, that becomes the main problem. It is already in Britain. In places where there were like 2,000 fascists, there are now 12,000 xenophobic nationalists. Behind our right-wing party called UKIP, similar to the Sweden Democrats, but not exactly the same. And that's frightening. That's frightening when, as we did last week, we had to go to a working-class town and fight for our lives to prevent this right-wing party taking the first parliamentary seat in an election. We did it, but it really challenged us because, of course, what we didn't do, we didn't give an inch to racism. Some on the left want to start saying, okay, you got a point. No, not an inch. But it means something that we have the luxury. I'm an intellectual, a writer. I live in London. If you're in Stoke-on-Trent, which is where this town was, and you're working class leftist, you have to go to the pub every night and see at the other end of the bar the person who is going to be your enemy in that ultimate conflict. And he's already going around saying, no mosques, all the things. I don't need to explain it to you. You've got them here. No to mosques, boycott halal meat, ban abortion. All of this stuff is there. And it's the price we pay for fighting it is it drains you of energy. If you're a working class leftist and you have to be in the same pub and club every night with a Trump-eyed, Geert Wilders type rightist, it's wearing. And so I think there's going to be, we have to find an effective way to fight it and put it back into its box. And so, because you asked me what's the end, that's where we are now. Now, in the middle of it all, we need, as a left movement, ideals. We need a goal. When we were on the streets, our colleagues last week in this British city, Stoke-on-Trent, the cleverest propaganda of the far right was how Labour in the past had, quotes, sold out the working class, how they become millionaires, how they had privatised industries, how you name it. They've got all the, what we used to call Strasserite, left far rightism. They've got all them arguments. And I think we have to, the last thing you can do, you can't defeat this thing with reformism. You defeat it with radicalism, but you defeat it with the radicalism that has a goal. And to come back to this,
what you think about. Wait,
yeah,
because he's signaling that we're going to have to wrap it up. So I have just 2 more questions actually, and one is I'm just curious. What do you think about Corbyn? You think he has any chances?
Well, Jeremy is, even more of the.
Do you know him personally?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of bullshit that says I'm one of his advisors, but I took part on the inner core of the campaign team to get him re-elected when the coup happened. But I don't work for him, and in fact, such advice as I give usually doesn't quite make it to being enacted. But no. I mean, so what do I think? I think Corbyn is the product of a moment of the masses behind British Labour saying no more neoliberalism. You were 5 candidates, 4 of them, even the good ones, the quite good progressive centrists, were effectively reluctant breakers away from neoliberalism. Jeremy just doesn't buy neoliberalism, and he's anti-neoliberal. So lots of young people join the party, vote Jeremy. Give it a year, the neoliberals strike back, so we have to do it all over again, wasting time, squandering moral resources, calling each other names on the internet, terrible things like that. So where are we now? I'm absolutely certain that the British ruling class, the elite, will go to any lengths to stop Corbyn being Prime Minister. We had one general brief the Sunday Times that there would be a military coup, quite interesting. Never repeated, but no general was ever jailed or dismissed. The entire press is against him, and he will be treated like an outsider, as Bernie Sanders would have been. However, what does that mean? I keep saying it. We can come to power, but only as the answer to the crisis. And I think, unfortunately, Brexit is going to create a massive crisis in Britain. That Theresa May is going to walk off the edge of the cliff into what we call a hard Brexit, without any deals with Brussels. Trade will be disrupted. Scotland will probably leave the United Kingdom. And in the mess, I think they may. And in the mess of it, in the mess that is then created, we have to have a very measured, very cohesive and coherent answer that is not neoliberalism. That's what our strategy is now. My strategy, I think Corbyn's strategy as well. Of course, the problem is if you've spent your life inside social democracy and you go along to your council meeting, you do your little administrative work, that's quite a big mind-bending moment to realise the party you're in is going to be treated almost like a threat to national security. And a lot of people don't buy it. So we're in an unusual position because instead of like in Germany or here, where you've got a left party, the left party runs the right party. That's the problem, runs the centrist party. And it's not a happy situation. Nobody is particularly happy about it. But we are there, and we wouldn't choose to start from there. So I support him, and I will support him right the way through to the election. He is going to be 70 during the election, next election. So logically, we need to look for a next generation. And I think that in doing that, we want to build some bridges to people who are not quite as left-wing as us, because there's only 25 MPs out of 100. Sorry, there's 25 MPs out of 200 plus who actually support him. So, as Gianni Agnelli once said, the boss of Fiat, when his factory was occupied, you can't make anything with 25,000 enemies. That's also true of us. We can't really achieve something until we find a modus operandi with the centre of our party.
Right. I mean, he's like here in Sweden, at least among the Swedish left, he's, the kind of shining light, like the hope, Well, after Syriza went down. But I want to ask you something more utopian now, because now we talked a lot about like contemporary, current things. If you were to imagine a post-capitalist world in concrete terms, what does it look like?
Well, Marx did describe it. I mean, communism in Marx's, in the early, young Hegelian, early Marx, insofar as he could describe it, people always comment that Marx seem to have it in for animals, because everything he imagines that's good involves killing animals. So it's hunting, it's fishing, it's and then in the evening you do literary criticism. But no, we're going to have a lot. Work will decline, the necessity of work will decline, and therefore we're going to have a lot more time. A lot of the things that cost money now can be produced for free, collaboratively, and we can choose how we do it. But do I claim to know what the end point will be? No, because like Marx, I regard the end of capitalism as the beginning of human history. So what will probably happen, and I write this in the book, is that instead of we see history right now as a series of economic systems that replace each other, what we will then see is a process of evolution of what it is to be human will begin. And in the book I describe it, I think the transition is going to take a long time. I think the shock we're going through is just part of it, but it's a long transition. And we need to understand that transitions have their own dynamics. These are the lessons we can learn from the Soviet economists. Although their conclusions were often wrong, the questions they asked were actually often very good questions. What does a transition look like? So I'm more interested in designing the transition than the end point, but I think that the end point will be a society with less work, more leisure, more collaborative production, and as far as the state exists, the state's #1 aim will be to produce as much as it can of goods and services that people can consume cheaply or free. Right now, the state spends all its time thinking about how can we make things expensive? How can we privatize the tram system or the railway system? How can we hike the fares? The state's aim should be to do what Syriza quietly did during those 2 weeks of summer 2015. They just literally opened the gates of the metro system, and without announcing it. And people kept asking, why hasn't society ground to a halt because the banks closed? Well, partly it's because everybody was traveling around for free. Free travel, free education, to university standard and beyond, free healthcare. These are the things that are precarious.
Sounds great. I will vote for you.
Good.
Now listen.
But now
we have to get in the audience for some questions and lectures. So I know there is a microphone over there.
I can only see you by doing this. I'm sorry. I now can see you.
Dear.
Hello.
Hello. I'm Ernst. Thank you so much for your book. I read it with great joy and actually used it for an article on Sweden and the coming great transformation. Contours of the next great. So I will use something of what you said last now and what you write in your book, and which is very concrete, and that is the Wikipedia. Because there's not only Wikipedia, there's also Uber, so I want you to talk about the perversion of the sharing or the collaborative economy. Because I think the state can do, even a social democratic or at least socialist state, could do a lot to smash the perversion just by having reasonable, decent alternatives to things like Airbnb, etc., etc. So we were asked to give talks, but now I'm posing a question instead.
Thank you, Mo. So that's a great question.
Okay, look, there is a clear difference between Uber, Airbnb, TaskRabbit, which are platforms. I don't think they're even technology companies. They are rent-seeking monopolies, designed as rent-seeking monopolies first. It doesn't matter to them whether as in some countries, Uber is banned from providing a taxi service. They just provide another service. All that matters to them is to do what all rent-seekers do: grab a piece of land. That land is the interchange between people. Okay, that is, as you say, it's a perversion of. It's an early form of. I think it will be an obsolete form of the peer-to-peer economy very soon. If the state had the will to do it, it could decree right now, all it would have to say is, obey the rules. I'm sorry, in London, Uber only exists because it openly defies the rules on taxi provision. Now, however, we who are dissing Uber and dissing Airbnb have to also recognize, you sit in an Uber cab with a 21-year-old woman late at night and you'll understand why Uber's popular. Because they are almost coercing the driver by saying, you know, the moment the driver does anything they don't like, bad review, bad review. Now, we need to find a balance between why people got sick of taxi firms that were all controlled by the mafia, taxi firms that were controlled by white racists who only every 5 seconds they're telling you a white racist joke. We need to find a balance, but it's happening. Berlin has cracked down on Airbnb. Barcelona has cracked down on Airbnb and Uber, and Barcelona is going further. I sit on an advisory board for the Barcelona City Council's technology strategy. That just means I go once a year and give a speech. But it's good because they intend to take control of the smart city. They're calling their initiative technological sovereignty. They signed a deal with Rome to do the same thing last month. So these cities that want to, these so-called rebel cities, are discovering ways to suppress the rent seeking, promote what we call platform cooperatives, and that's all good as well. Because I know there's a lot of skepticism around the peer-to-peer economy, what was called the sharing economy. My frustration with it is it's too small scale. It's like having a factory in northern England in 1788 and saying, that's a nice thing, have a factory. In fact, what the state did, it said, we like these, let's have thousands of them. Let's clear the land. Let's make it legal to move out of your job. Let's put weavers out of business and put them all into factories. The state created industrial capitalism. We need the state to create this transition to the three silo economy. And the new silo, the wiki, the cooperative, the collaborative, is the one that Uber, Airbnb actually exist to suppress. You don't need to clap. Which time?
Well, maybe they want to clap. They like your answer. Okay, next question.
Hi, good evening. I'm David. Thanks for an interesting talk. I haven't read your book, so I'd say that from the outset, and I'm sorry if this is evident to anyone who has. But I jumped a little on something that you said in the beginning, that it is the ability of the working class to organize itself that drives innovation, and also that the ability of capitalism to adapt and evolve is dependent on its ability to generate surplus profit. I'm wondering if this is not, I'm challenging one of your fundamental assumptions here. Is that not a misunderstanding? Is not both innovation and the ability of capitalism to evolve dependent on individuals who solve problems, because that is what we as humans do? So that even if the information technology in the way it evolves currently will not no longer be, in the future be able to generate enough profit, there will still be people around making innovations that are valuable to other people in other markets in which the information technology is much less relevant. People will still need to eat, to clothe themselves, to have housing, etc. Things that can only be produced if there's with material resources that have value. What do you say about that? Okay. Is it not only partly true that it's that innovation and its ability to evolve depends on those things? Thank you.
It's an oversimplification, and if I said it that way, it is an oversimplification. The working class forces innovation. What I was referring to is there's a specific insight I have in long wave theory. Okay, so long cycle theory in economics says, you know, after about 25 years, most societal business models break down, and then at that point, usually, what the existing elite does is try and solve the problem of the present system by just suppressing wages. Usually it can't, because the working class is so strong that you can't suppress them. And that drives a wave of innovation towards the next wave. So that's the pattern that we observe. It's Kondratiev, Schumpeter, Carlota Perez, all talk about this. My argument about the neoliberal era is it's the first era for 200 years where they actually managed to do the suppression, to do the suppressing wages and suppressing the ability to resist. And therefore my example about the automated car wash is a real one, but not the only one. The anthropologist David Graeber calls them bullshit jobs. Millions of jobs that actually don't need to exist are created to keep people inside the credit system, keep people inside the cell phone consumer system, and they do things that you just don't need to do. This is quite a weird position inside capitalism, because, like you, I define capitalism, its progressive nature, as Marx did, as precisely, it rewards the whole of society if innovators find ways of making machinery to do what people used to do. That's capitalism. Technological innovation is built into it. Now, I argue that its ability to adapt arises from its ability to do the technological innovation in what you might call socially conditioned waves, and that the waves are important, and that after a wave of technological innovation that is successful, you get higher wages, higher skills, higher consumption needs, higher general standard of living, and new technologies that are more expensive. You can certainly see these things arising right now, but at a systemic level, I argue it's not enough, and that there's something different about information technology, which lies in its ability to exponentially collapse prices and to replace jobs faster than it can replace them with higher skilled ones. Now, I could be wrong. It's a hypothesis. The postcapitalism thesis is a thesis, but it's one that you could see. For example, I don't know which part of the world you come from, but if you look at Tim O'Reilly, who is a software guru in Silicon Valley, he founded OSCON, open source convention. He believes most of that, except that he believes it's solvable through another kind of social change, which is to marketize everything, marketize all services, healthcare, etc., and then give everybody a basic income to spend in that vast market. So that answers that one part of your question about innovation and the working class. I probably don't have too much time to answer it all, but I think that's my attempt at a 5-minute answer.
Yeah, but that actually makes sense, because that's the reason why, most of the technological development has come on the consumer side rather than on the production side, is because labor is so cheap. You don't need to replace all these 890 million Chinese workers with machines because they're so cheap. But of course, if they did resist, and if they demanded if they successfully demanded the salaries that we have here, of course, the development towards replacing them with robots would be faster. That's logical. But I don't know if we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. One more question. Okay.
Women.
But where's the microphone?
Sorry, I'm not a woman.
There's a woman there.
But I'm going to ask my question since he gave me the mic.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering if green industrial investments, green infrastructure like a Green New Deal, and the Mondragon model, the Mondragon industrial cooperatives, are an alternative to the constraints of the valorization of software that you discussed. Because you can't make infrastructure investments with software. And your country's infrastructure is rotting when it comes to transportation. And also alternatives to fascism, because you can employ a lot of people who are displaced. And the last quick thing is I think you have to talk a little about militarism. You have a military-industrial complex, as we have here, and that's going to be a constraint on certain resistance strategies.
We don't have time to talk about all of this, but maybe you can choose one thing.
Let me just talk about green tech. Okay, look, when I say I think there's going to be a 100 to 200 year transition, that's what I mean. The crisis we're going through certainly has capitalist answers to it, and one of them is for the capitalists to adopt en masse a Green New Deal. A Green New Deal will be exactly like the Rooseveltian New Deal, especially because it could then learn from the Rooseveltian New Deal and learn from what Roosevelt did during the war. The American right don't idealize Roosevelt's New Deal. They idealize Alfred Knudsen and GM during the war. There's a book called In Freedom's Forge, which is almost like required reading in the Trump movement, which describes the militarization, interestingly enough, from your point, of production to employ everybody. Now, we could do that. We could do that. We could almost Alfred Knudsen-like mobilize the whole of society to get rid of the hydrocarbon industry, replace it with renewables within 10 years, get rid of wasteful use of raw materials and impose circularity on all businesses, impose 100% recyclability within 10 years. I think we could do that. Do you know what? I don't think they're going to do it. Why? Because Trump's not just about the fascists who do support him. Trump is about retarding technological progress. To fulfill the promise, everybody gets a great job, there has to be jobs. You can't have GM close down a factory in Mexico, open it in Michigan, and it's run by robots. No, it's got to be run by people. So I also think that they're going to, you know, I mean, if anybody is any doubt, there is a massive counter-revolution going on against the Paris Climate Accord. They're going to try and rip it up. And Basel III, you mentioned Basel III. There is a counter-revolution against all the palliative measures that capitalism took since 2008 on the climate, on the banking system. These guys want to rip it up. And I think that is the new struggle. But yeah, I mean, actually, I will march side by side with anybody, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, anybody, Angela Merkel, who wants to decarbonize the world, employ people for yet another, you know, long cycle of history in greening the world, because everybody's future depends on it. But at the same time, A, we can't rely on them. B, we have to have the concrete strategies. How would we mobilize in Sweden or in Britain, you know, X% of GDP into these industries? And at the end, but at the end of the day, you know, I've been into a PV factory, one of the most modern solar panel factories in the world in East Germany, in Saxony. Nobody works there. They just watch it. They just watch the things being made by robots. Germany likes employment, so there's a few workers hanging around. But no, you could do without them quite easily. Just a guy at the end to take it off and stamp it with a, you know, a brand name, and you know, that's the problem. You know, even this stuff is susceptible. Because I'm not talking about software, I'm talking about the information impact on materiality. It's all susceptible to that. PV, solar panels above all, they're ultra cheap. Anyway, we've got loads more we could talk about, but apparently that's it.
Yeah, and it's true that we haven't really talked about climate so much, but you have an interesting chapter about climate change and how we can stop it. So if any of you want a signature in the book, Paul is going to be outside and signing books, and if you think I misrepresented the book here, you can always read it for yourself. So thank you for listening. Good night.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Superb, thank you. We get off on it.